Good afternoon, everybody. You're very welcome to today's presentation with Engineers Ireland. My name is Roy O'Connor. I chair the Roads and Transportation Society here, and we're delighted to bring you today's talk on the innovations in cycle infrastructure. We have a fantastic speaker, Brian Deegan here, who's a technical director of walking and cycling with Urban Movement in the UK. So we're really looking forward to what he has to say. But as this is our final presentation in the Active Travel series, we just want to bring a few acknowledgements to the hard work that has been put in behind making this so successful, which has of course been both the quality of the presentations and of course your attendance. But I'm just going to introduce Finola, who's done some Trojan work in the background, to say a few words on behalf of the National Transport Authority before I come back and introduce Brian properly.
Thanks everyone. Yeah, this is our 12th and final, for now, a webinar in the Active Travel series. I am Finola Driscoll, Senior Programme Manager in the National Transport Authority, and we've had huge interest from engineers, and I've seen the attendance sheets, like planners, architects, landscape architects, advocates, consultants, NGOs, political parties. So it's been brilliant to have that huge interest. We've had over 6,000 people register and 3,000 people attending the sessions live, and another 3,200 watching and rewatching videos, and that keeps building. So that's huge numbers. And thanks so much to Elva, Lubna and Roy and all the Engineers Ireland who made it so easy to do this. And easy is a lovely thing. And to my colleagues and all the presenters, including Brian, and to you, the attendees. And I just wanted to say it's been so encouraging that we've been able to come together, albeit virtually. I feel like we've the genesis of a community building here. As a profession, engineers are often aligned, and possibly not without merit, as being quite vehicle dominated and, you know, inadvertently or you know, unthinkingly creating people hostile places. But I think this interest has reflected the kind of maturing of our profession in that regard, and the interests of our younger members. And it also reflects how great active travel projects are to be involved in. Like I've heard from hard-boiled engineers who built motorways and tunnels around the world to say, you know, these are the projects that have given them the greatest professional satisfaction. And I think any of you that have seen a cycle track go in, or a greenway or footpath through a school, or that most mythical of creatures, a link through a housing estate, you can really feel the tangible benefits. Like, it's not just about transport, it's about health, it's about society, social kind of interactions, it's just well-being, and you can feel that at the community level. And it's a privileged position to be in, and I think we need to take sustenance from that. Ask your friends in IT and finance. Like, it's lovely to do something that has tangible benefits, but I think we do need to take the sustenance, because active travel schemes are hard, as you know. And that it would just be about technical skills. I think it does call for us to be far more skilled up than previous generations of professionals, of engineers and architects and landscape architects, turbo engineers, if you will, because you're agents of change, and change generates fear, you know, and that's a very primal emotion, and it's a difficult one to be around, and it's a difficult one to overcome. It requires probably equal parts of empathy and grit to get there, and that's not an easy line to walk. And we don't always get it right, and we don't always get projects through, and we don't even get some of them started, but we keep going, and we go again, and we go again, and we fail better, and we go again. And if it's helpful, for me, I find it encouraging to think of cultural change as trying to shift a boulder from the top of a mountain. It's probably one of the earliest engineering endeavors. You never know which wedge is going to shift that boulder. Like, every project in is a wedge, every project attempted is a wedge. Infrastructure itself is just a wedge. Like, there's been a lot of social change lately, and that's all added wedges. And I know we're on a timeline, and time is of the imperative, but we have to be steadfast and persistent and just add the wedges we can. And this is the highest attended series in the history of Engineers Ireland. It's probably Roy confirmed, it's the first time in the history of the Roads and Transport Society that non-motorized travel has dominated their events. That's a wedge. You better believe that's a wedge. That's a big wedge, and you've been part of that. So I hope you feel the support of this new kind of community around us. The NTA is here to support. Engineers Ireland is here to support. And as Brian will demonstrate, and you know, there's people that are doing this work all over the world who are generous and happy to share and support. So looking to the future, the NTA will be organising extensive training in 2022 across our long-awaited and hotly awaited National Cycle Manual 2. And that, so we've got more support coming your way. So with that, I'm just going to say thank you to you all, and I'm going to end this 12-week series on active travel with a wildly inappropriate imperative. Drive on, people, with care for your work, your communities, and yourself, because it's not easy, and accessing the support that's there. Drive on.
Well done, Fiona, and thanks a lot to you as well for all you've done. It's been quite important. But without further ado, we'll proceed along. Just to say that Dee Keogh is here with us as well today on the panel. Dee is the CPD director with Engineers Ireland, and we'll hear from her after Brian. So, Brian, I was looking at your bio here, and thanks for talking about it there yesterday. It's a substantial one, but I think it's worth highlighting to people the full extent of it, so that they know what you've done and accomplished over the last couple of decades and how important it is. So, everybody, look, Brian is one of the UK's leading street design engineers and was the co-author of the London Cycling Design Standards. So, he's a background in engineering, and he's also led high-profile policy and planning projects. He's helped develop Transport for London's Healthy Street Check, a key tool in designing for healthy streets. He's helped ensure that the design quality of all projects associated with the London Mayor's £1 billion Cycle and Healthy Streets programme was delivered. And as a design engineer for the Camden Council, Brian introduced the UK to light segregation for cycling and subsequently assisted TfL in testing of innovative approaches to cycle-friendly signalised junction design, such as the holds left, two-stage right turns and early release. As a street design all-rounder, Brian has experience tackling the many and varied demands placed on the complex urban streets and spaces, from designing engineering, traffic modelling and network strategies through to conducting research in the highest industry standards. He's helpful and pragmatic and passionate about making better streets, as I've learned over the last couple of days. Brian's a well-known trainer of fellow professionals, and as an inspirational public speaker, he is a design reviewer for the Urban Design London. He's published several technical papers on cycle planning and recently led the infrastructure chapter on the draft EU cycling strategy. He made National Transport Consultant of the Year back in 2006 for his work on the London Cycle Network, and in 2014 his work on the Camden Royal College Street was named the Cycling Scheme of the Year, plus many more awards there that we could go through, Brian, but you're very welcome and we're delighted to have you here. No pressure at all in terms of that build-up, but look, fantastic to have you with us, as Finola said, and look, I'll leave you to it. Off you go. We can hear you there, so I think you're all good. We'll speak to you at the end.
Excellent, thanks, Roy. Yeah, no, I do sound totally amazing, but it's also a little bit depressing because there was just kind of, for most of that, there was just me there doing it, and we kind of wanted thousands of other people working in cycling infrastructure in London and the UK, but nobody was really that interested for large parts of it. So I often say I certainly wasn't the cleverest, but I was the one there doing it, and I'll get through to that. So I'm going to talk about innovations, and I'm really going to show you the kind of latest thing, because we've got quite a high skilled audience here. We're all engineers, so I'll get into the nitty gritty and show you cutting edge. But I also thought it's worth kind of defining and going what's already out there, because certainly like some of the things that Roy was talking about there, like hold the left and two-stage right and cycle gates and early release and all this stuff that we were doing in the UK in like 2014-15. I still spend a lot of my time now going around the UK and people are going, what's that, what's that, what's that? So innovation's a lot in the eye of the beholder, like some of the things that Finola was saying, just thinking about kids and place and not just about cars. That's a massive innovation to lots of people in our profession. So I'm going to take a few slides to just go through kind of like more about how brilliant I am, but we'll jump over that one and show some of the stuff that I've been working on over the years and hopefully point out some kind of useful elements, because they might well be innovative to you and they might help you push on. We'll start off with the front page here. There's not nearly enough seesaws on cycle infrastructure. There's something to think about. Think about the kids, think about designing for children. I spoke at a road safety auditors conference a couple of months ago, and I just go, why don't you know how kids even see, how they perceive the environment, how they cross the roads, that they can't perceive the difference between 20 and 40 mile an hour approach speeds? Why are you not picking that up? There's a whole bunch of retraining that we need to do, because everybody in my profession as highway engineers trained on cars and the design manual for roads and bridges in the UK, and it's kind of used quite a lot around the world as well. There's no footways, there's recently been a cycling section put into it, which is all good, but we're all a little bit behind really, because the unit of currency in my profession is still the car, and we're trying to make people think, hey, there's these other things, and I'm really going to concentrate on one of those other things, which is cycling today. So let's have a little bit of a recap of the last 10 years of my career to see what's out there. So I'm probably most well known for working on various design standards, and I'd love to take you through all these ones. Probably the most famous one I did was the London Cycling Design Standards, which was the result of 10, 15 years of trying everything, getting some bits right, getting some bits wrong, and trying to pass that information on there. I still think it's one of the best out there. The one to the right of that is the new standards that we're using in England, the cycle infrastructure design ones. And I kind of view that as a national version of the one I did in London, because ego's not a problem for me. There's a few other things that are worth checking out. The Scottish one's quite good. The Cycling by Designer kind of played more of a kind of editing role. And as I did on the Dublin Bus Connect corridor design guide as well, which is quite interesting, brought in to kind of talk about the signal junctions and the approaches. I don't think they quite listened to everything I was saying, but I like to feel that I made it a little bit of a rich environment as well. And there's some Manchester stuff and healthy streets, and I've already had the great intro, so I don't have to go on about this, but all these things weren't written for fun. They're written to kind of help fellow professionals, and with each one that I put together, I try to get something new in there. There's no point just rehashing the same thing. What's the kind of newest thing? Like, so the Leicester one, for example, has got a really nice chapter on shared use and all principles for managing cyclists around pedestrians in like plazas. Can't find that anywhere else, but it's in the Leicester one. It's not in the London one. The London one was all about establishing level of service, and we'll get onto that now. So yeah, other things that I do as a spectacular all-rounder, the design tools that we're using in the UK at the moment, I still think are like the best out there, albeit there's some quite nice Australian ones in there, but I will say the cycling level of service tool, which is basically a whole list of attributes that you can look at a scheme, and you can get an overall score out of 100. And when you're talking and connecting things up the chain, all really senior managers and commissioners and mayors and the like want to know is like, well, how good is it? And there's a way there of saying this is an 80%er. 70% is my go Dutch criteria. If you've got over 70%, you're in the kind of a Dutch ballpark. So like you've got some kind of way of quantifying it, like where did you put that curb line? Where did you put that cycle lane? Did you protect it? What's it like at the junctions? Tot all these things up. What's the comfort line? What's the safety? And you get some kind of approximation of how good it is to the user. And I thoroughly recommend that, because you can have the best design standards in the world, which is a whole list of options, but did you apply the right option in the right context, and what did it mean to the user is the fundamental that you can never forget. And so there's some good ways of doing that. The one on the right is the junction assessment tool, another tool that I helped come up with, or basically just quantifying how easy or hard is it to make every single movement at a signal junction, like if you're on a cyclist. So rather than thinking, oh, well, the route's going that way across the crossroads, well, so that'll be okay, you've got that, and we'll get the way back, that's 2. Well, what about the other 10 movements? How easy or hard are they? So there's a way of like quantifying that and getting percentages as well. So there's some good ways of taking what we do as engineers, removing some of the mystique, and say it scores that, and we spent this. I think that they're quite useful things to get over there, and also like act as a little bit of a checklist. I go, well, did I think about that? Did I think about that? And really the healthy street check, which I'll get to in a minute, is a kind of extension of the cycling one to cover pedestrians as well. All right, we're going through it. We're going to still keep deep diving my CV, but hopefully we're getting some interesting things out there. There's a couple of academic style books that are, particularly the one on the left, the Cycling Cultures one, because I'm a strange engineer in that I've got a master's in engineering. I work as an engineer. My first degree was actually sociology, and so I do a lot of work with the transport, the what they call now, the scientists. Oh, I've forgotten what they're called now. Anyway, but yeah, like basically sociologists who do cycling, who I've forgotten the name of, even though I've been a member for 15 years. But there we go. But this Cycling Cultures one's a good one. So there's a chapter in there on wayfinding and the efforts that we did in London to find what kind of wayfinding systems work for cyclists. So there's some good stuff in there. The one on the right there is about the planning system. So again, find an engineer's perspective on that. I work with some Dutch colleagues to say what's different about the UK planning system and the Dutch planning system in terms of how they treat cycling and how integrated it is. So there's some good stuff out there as well. Hopefully a couple of these things you go, oh, I want to know about that. Hopefully there's a few ideas. On the more scientific engineering front, I've done a couple of big papers for the Institution of Civil Engineers, which I'm sure people are members of on this call. And I just mention the one on the left first. The cycle infrastructure in London was a 10-year study. I mean, you never get paid for these things, but you like to get them out to move the profession on. That was kind of like 10 years of looking at everything that was built in London over a census period and saying, well, did it get more people cycling? Did it cause more collisions? You know, there were the two big ones that we kind of looked at. And as I was putting that together and measuring this across all the 33 boroughs of London, there was a couple of interesting things that came out. One was all the areas that focused on shared use footways as the main provision for cycling, which is still something that people want to do across the world. Well, they seem to arrest the growth of cycling beyond the do nothing scenario. So all the ones that did absolutely nothing infrastructure wise had a higher growth than the ones that spent small fortunes like extending footways and putting cyclists on them. So that was an interesting thing that came out of that report. So I often cite that one. And it came up with a kind of magic mix as well, which I hadn't realized from the years of doing it, of getting crossings, getting filters and getting main roads and doing the combination of things. That's what leads to the mode shift. So yeah, some really interesting stuff in that. The one on the right, it's all about involving stakeholders in the process and the efforts that we did in the UK to do that, particularly with cycling, because we used to have the case before we started doing this that we'd build a scheme and then everybody would hate it, particularly the cyclists. In fact, some cyclists used to take us to court every year for wasting public funds. I'm sure there'll be people on this call that are aware of these issues. So I thought, well, why don't we talk to them? Why don't we ride them? Why don't we get them involved in things and actually have a discussion on site? And then we found by actually involving people before we'd start designing it, we shifted from design and defend to being a little bit more collaborative. And then by the time the design actually came out to consultation, they were defending it and they realized why it was the way it was. It might have been the perfect thing that they wanted, but they could see why, and it moved the whole project on in London in particular, massively. We went from having 2 or 3 million a year budgets to 40, 50 million just by getting all this goodwill generated. So there's two kind of landmark reports, and I'm presently writing a book for the ICE as well, so there's one to watch out for. Anyway, we'll keep going. All right, maybe you're doing an economic strategy. Well, someone in Ireland's done a great job on this. If you're spending £1 million a week, that's the plan on active travel, then you don't really need me to tell you the justification because someone's already done it. But the EU cycling strategy was mentioned. Always good to refer for that, for those kind of definitive figures that were sweated over by some very serious economic people. The Greater Manchester kind of regional one, and there's the kind of London one as well that we did the business case for that helped draw down £1 billion. So there's some good papers out there if you're looking to make an economic case as well. We're all getting up to speed now, aren't we? Yeah, of course we are. The kind of technical guides, I'm going to talk later about CYCLOPS junctions, and I can't really do it justice in a couple of minutes where I'm going to mention it as an innovation, but there is a technical note that we put out on that kind of that really way of aping the Dutch in a slightly more UK style way that you might find appropriate, you might not, but at least it's in some of the Irish guides now as well. So quite excited about that. And this has been mentioned as well, so I'll sheepishly mention it again. The healthy street check for designers, where you've got cycling and pedestrian stuff assessed at the same time together. So you're not robbing Peter to pay Paul. We want space from cars. Repeat after me. That's the space we want. You don't want to halve a footway to get a cycle track in there. And I'm not saying anybody here on this call would do, but I've seen people think that and go, well, we can't do that. We've got to have 4 lanes for cars. That's a given. The cars are fixed. Now, what can we do with this 3 meters bit of space here and this tiny bit of verge? If you assess the two at the same time, it forces you to make the big decisions about reallocating road space. So quite proud of that one and well worth looking at. Just like every topic, we're going there. Road safety, and road safety policy. There's a couple of really good papers that aren't nearly read enough that I did with the European Transport Safety Council. I'm just looking at it. It's always good to benchmark yourself across Europe. Last time I was in Ireland was at the Velocity, and lots of European colleagues coming over going, oh, the stuff's rubbish. Why are you doing this? Why are you doing that? It's worthwhile putting yourself in that perspective, because it can often drive, like those in politics and power, on to go, well, why are we behind? And certainly a lot of the innovation that I did in London was a result of campaigners saying we want to go Dutch, and the mayor saying, what does that mean? And they're going, well, here's what we do, and here's what the Dutch do, and here's how we quantify it, and this is how far off we are. And they're like, right, be as good as them. Millions and millions and billions later, yeah, you're still trying to catch up. But they really help, these kind of benchmarking projects, for that. A couple of we're nearly done now. We're nearly through the whole CV thing, but again, write these documents for a reason. The big one on the left there, which I wrote with the London cycling campaign, which was interesting to work with a campaign group. But we did it to try and influence the Mayor of London on the approach towards a mayoral election, on how to decarbonise transport and what the main steps should be based on all the evidence that we reviewed. And I've certainly always seen cycling as part of that bigger picture. And you're not as man now. I remember when I started cycling, go, well, I'm doing this to save the planet, and people go, are you mad? 20 years ago. Now everybody's saying that, and you're not ushered out of the room as a lunatic. But there's some really good practical steps in there for just how much CO2 you can save by doing cycling, what it actually means in economic terms, and just like a kind of step-by-step thing. So we've got a decarbonisation plan out in the UK at the moment. It's all right, but I think the government in the UK are looking for regions to really tackle this one. So they're being a little bit, you can do it all with electric cars. And then you look at the evidence and going, actually, if we switch to electric cars, that's actually going to be cumulatively a higher total of CO2 than just remaining as we are. It's about getting rid of cars. There you go. You heard it here first. You shouldn't have heard it here first, but I mentioned it anyway. So there's some good stats and evidence in that document. There's a big one in the middle, which is something that us engineers aren't particularly great at doing. That's actually talking to people about schemes. The ICE's own documentation says when you go to a public meeting, don't spoke unless you're spoken to, just stick with the facts, try to say as little as possible. These are all the advice. It doesn't really help you get schemes, particularly when you're talking about low traffic neighborhoods or the 15-minute cities, and you're restricting private motor vehicles. Then you need to have a good conversation, and to have a good conversation with people, there's certain skills and techniques you use. So I'll put that document together again with the campaign groups to say, look, engineers, try and do this. Here's some kind of process to it. So there's a useful one. And if you don't get too sick of hearing me speak, there's a whole bunch of videos. We've been doing a weekly webinar. It started as a result of COVID to pass information on the topic of how to do a transport response, and we've kind of expanded since there. So there's a couple of 100 hours of us talking about that on the webinar on the right. Okay, so that's what we've got. Oh, there's a bit more. Oh, I forgot there was this one. Okay, yeah, training manuals as well. I do a lot of training, as we mentioned. I do a kind of week-long course, and everything I say on that course, I painstakingly wrote down, and it's all written in the Be a Champion manual, which I think are well worth looking. It's in a kind of familiar style, but there's there's some technical information in there as well, and it helps you get a good overview of what are urban designers going on about, what are landscape architects going on about, what are transport planners. So if you are just of the engineering persuasion, you'll never get a scheme built if all you know is engineering. And I think Finola was hinting at this as well. You need to know what everybody else is looking at. What do public health colleagues want? And unless you can talk in all those languages and get it up, you'll never really be able to champion a scheme through to actually getting built, particularly if it's a cycling scheme. Strike all that off if you just want to do stuff for cars. The road's way open to get stuff built there, but when you actually want to do some kind of change to the street layouts, you need to be able to talk everybody's language. So that's a little bit of what that document's all about. Okay, I'm still on intro. We will get there. Right, we're into innovations now. Brand new, hot off the press stuff that I'm working with. There's a gentleman in Seattle that I've been talking with who does this software called AB Streets. I was introduced to him by a professor at Leeds Institute of Transport Studies, Professor Robin Lovelace, who did the propensity to cycle tool in this kind of area. And we've been talking about, it's been quite controversial, the low traffic neighbourhoods thing. We're making the news and the Daily Mail's up in arms, and people are marching down the street saying that we're doing more damage than the Blitz. It's like North Korea because we've stopped cars going down there. So we're looking at like different ways of approaching the topic, and the cutting edge in this area is what we're calling the kind of gamification of low traffic neighborhoods. And there's a little bit of an extract on the left there. That map there has got like a little tool, shows you where all the rat runs are. You can click on it and go, let's put a closure there. And using like the software on the right, I didn't want to show a video or a tech demo, but it kind of shows a live representation of where all the cars are going. So you can see, and you can do it online collaboratively. You could just give access to the software to a neighborhood and say, tell us where you want to put stuff, agree amongst yourselves, be as collaborative as possible, because we're finding when we just like drop closures in at the moment, there's a lot of like a very organized anti-groups that are coming after us, and it's not pretty. So there's a way of actually involving people and getting them to decide their own future. It used to be fairly straightforward to do this kind of thing, but it's getting more and more controversial, and I'm hoping you're not having a situation we're having in the UK or in Ireland. So anyway, there's a really good tool. Like, watch out for that one. I'm starting to use it in earnest, and there's just some really good techniques. And I will say it's all open source and free, the AB Street stuff, and the guy running it's a real star. So yeah, there's obviously different ways of doing this one, but if you're trying to do like an assignment model, you're going to have like a whole bank of computers running for days, and it's going to cost you hundreds of thousands. And like I'm not doing down our fellow consultants, but it's quite nice if you put that kind of like knowledge and effect in the hands of people and let them decide their own traffic management fate. So that's what we're looking at there. All right, let's do a few more. Yeah, so I was introduced as the person who kind of pioneered like protection, I call it now, rather than like segregation, because I've got to acknowledge I was reading Bikeway's State of the Art not so long ago, and it's got a whole section on protected bike lanes, which is almost word for word the definition that I came up with in the London Cycling Design Standards in 2014, albeit this document's from 1974. So there's nothing really new on the sun. You're like, oh, what is this new thing? Just placing objects on cycle lane. It's really not that new. It kind of goes back to pretty much the time when we started doing cycle lanes that were instantly protected. Just that knowledge seemed to be forgotten and lost to time. So anyway, so the big issues we had and still have with that light protection, albeit on the slide there, you've got the kind of wave delineator on the one for the subject we're talking about now, and that's quite attractive. Little bit of a trip hazard for pedestrians, I will say. But anyway, what we've just completed in London is like an architectural competition. So I was like, look, I'm an engineer. I don't know how to make things aesthetically beautiful. Let's do a big competition for architects to have a go. And this was the winning entry, the kind of tulip. And you can see on the right the way those tulips come together, that actually you can squish them and they'll kind of puff back up. So we're looking at manufacturing these. It's a combination as well, one that goes with a kind of like a slotted drain protection thing, which is really exciting. But if you're doing any of these and you want a whole bunch of great ideas, I've got all the files, and it's a really interesting project. And I'm more than happy to talk. Like, all the entries were brilliant, and all the entries were better than the stuff that we're using as standard at the moment, probably with the exception of that wave delineator, which won a competition in America, a similar one. And we got David Byrne over from Talking Heads to kind of like judge this competition with Jeremy Vine and the like. So anyway, there's some really, really exciting movements, and that aesthetic issue that you have with doing cheap and dirty protections of cycle lanes. Well, if these objects are a little bit more attractive, maybe we can roll a few more of them out there. So there's a little bit of an innovation to watch. We're finally making these things a little bit more aesthetically pleasing and trying to make them function still as well. Okay, what else is going on? Yeah, a little bit when it comes to link design. Again, it's one of those things that's as old as the hills. People have been doing cycle tracks, curb, concrete, fill, lovely. But all the different like more environmentally friendly ways to do that. And this visualization was kind of using this thing that we're calling a Tredge. So Lancaster University have been working in Manchester on some of the key corridors. They did one across a bunch of schools on Princess Road, looking at different combinations of plants. We used to think birch hedges were the best. Actually, are they better in combinations with different plant sources? So there's a whole bunch of stuff out there. And the main aim is to kind of filter the pollutants coming from the engines of cars, our old friend cars again, and stopping that getting to the people on the other side, in this case, cyclists and pedestrians. So we're looking at lots of the technologies moving on there. It gets caught up in the leaves, rain takes it down into the soil. If you've got a nice wash away, you can clean it before it gets into the water supply. Good ways of stopping it actually getting into people's lungs, because air pollution's a massive killer. We know that. Why can't, while we're doing cycling infrastructure, sort out that issue as well? And like there was a local authority, I'm trying not to mention names, there was a local authority in London, perchance, who were trying to give back all their cycling money. They had 30 million to do it, and they were like, we can't defend cycling schemes in terms of air quality. Well, we're going to have to stop this business, because we're taking space from cars. So they're getting a little bit more congested, they're going slower, they're giving off more pollutants. This is terrible for air quality. And this argument's been raging in the UK for a while. And I was like, hang on, think about proximity. For every meter you are, like a pedestrian's further away from a car, there's a 20 to 40% drop in their risk of exposure. So put the cycle tracks in, even if nobody ever uses it, you've got your pedestrians another 3 or 4 meters away from the source. So you're saving them. And I gave them all the scientific evidence for it, and they're like, we're back in business, we can defend. But this is taking it a step further. You've got the distance created by the cycle track, but 2, you've got like a filter. So even though that street's going to be polluted by the cars, we can sort that out. And don't think electric cars won't have their issues, because we know the majority comes from particulates from tires and brake dust and all the rest of it. Let's pick that up and stop it getting to the people on the street there. So there's some really interesting stuff going on in that area. So just think, do we need to just pour concrete all over this, or could it do something that actually has some other issues? Like it could have some SUDS benefits as well, and stopping stormwater runoffs for the increasingly dramatic climate events that we're going to be having over the next 20, 30 years till we're all extinct. Priority junctions. I'm going through the topics, and I'm going through them quick because I'm just trying to give you lots of ideas. And by all means, see me or contact me if you want any more information about any of this one. But one of the things that I'm often asked from like 20 odd years, I'll say 20 odd years of working in cycle infrastructure, is how do you take a cycle track past the side road? And I always start training with saying, I don't know. I don't know how to do it properly in the UK. We can look at state of the art from other places and say all the things that we tested. But the closest I can get to saying, just do it like this, is kind of what we're looking at in the UK at the moment. The side road zebra, the thing that you can do anywhere, and you can definitely do in Ireland. A side road zebra there, we're trying to make a case to the government to authorise that without the beacons and the zigzags, so we can actually use a side road. Tie that in with elephant footprints, which are the square blobby markings in there. And you kind of get a parallel crossing, like inferring and delivering priority for cyclists and inferring and delivering priority for pedestrians across every side road where you've got a track. For me, that's what we want, and I'm kind of building to that one. And if you look at like the local transport note, LCN 120, the new standards, there's a kind of missing image because I didn't quite get the research through in time. That's going to come out in the next week or so, but have a look at the work we've been doing on side road zebras in Manchester. There's a whole bunch of research coming out with the Transport Research Laboratory, who I've worked with a lot in the past, and we think we've made a pretty blinding case. So I want to say, when someone said, how do we take the cycle track past the side road? Yeah, like that. At the moment, that one on the right has been photoshopped by me because they don't exist in the UK yet. But yeah, why not Ireland? Let's talk about roundabouts just to cover all the bases, although I'm very far from being a roundabout specialist. In fact, I hate them. That's usually because they've got a much higher cycling fatality and incident and collision rate than any other type of infrastructure. Yeah, and really, if I'd done this 5 years ago, I'd been going on about the Dutch roundabout and the trials that we did, and you all know about that now. I know, and there's been some really interesting attempts at that in Ireland. But there's a really interesting attempt. Sorry about the terrible picture quality. I took it off a video I did of me riding through it. But this is like a an implied Dutch roundabout, just done with materials, no white line markings. You can see the what looks a bit zebra-like in the foreground, and then there's a little kind of a grey strip. So you've got basically the same geometry as a Dutch roundabout with an annular cycle lane going around that's in close proximity to the pedestrian zebra crossing. But we've kind of done it all with material blocks in a kind of a, dare I say the phrase, a shared space kind of way, albeit this is more of a shared surface. But anyway, we can get into that another time. But there was some interesting stuff in there, and it's worth, I don't think they quite cracked it, don't get me wrong, in MPhil, but it's something to consider, and it's an innovation in this area that's well worth thinking about. Crossings, I'm going to go big on this one, and I know I'm already running out of time, but I'm just going to keep going. Crossings is something that I've always been a massive fan of, and I think they're the most important things you can do on a cycling network. You know, okay, you put in some like cycle track and you've taken a nice picture, brilliant. You know, you might do a few of those in your career. You might get 10 miles of that stuff done in your career, designed up there if you're really on fire. But really the day-to-day thing is the crossings, getting across these kind of barrier roads where the cars are dominating, and connecting all the quieter residential streets and the ones that aren't quite as heavily trafficked together. This is your basic network functioning. And kind of, I'll tell you how the penny dropped for me, because this might sound blindingly obvious, but it took me a long time to figure it out. When the London Cycle Network was effectively cancelled around about 2010, I had to do a paper for all the powers that be on the bits of the network that I'd spent 10 years trying to build, the bits of the network that I wanted to keep, that were most important. I was going through, well, is it the bit of cycle track there? Is it that one? And I started thinking, and it ties in with that Cycling Cultures book that I showed as well, of like how people actually navigate around. And I thought, well, actually, if that crossing by the side of the British Library in Camden on Euston Road went, how would anybody from the north get south? And I started plotting these crossing points, going, yeah, we've got to keep these crossing points. Otherwise, how do you get across these these 6-lane roads? If they go, we're stuffed. And there's certain crossings that lead you from quiet streets where we get 20,000 cyclists a day in London. And if they went, that would be a complete nightmare. And then eventually the cogs worked, and I went, well, why don't we just do more crossings? And really, if you look at the stuff that we've been doing in Greater Manchester, it's about putting thousands of new crossings in, just getting these in. And this is one of our latest designs of crossing, the so-called SPARROW crossing. Why do we call it that? Because it's a signalized parallel crossing, which is something that you couldn't do under UK law. It all gets a little bit ridiculous, but as soon as you separate a cyclist from a pedestrian and you're trying to get them across the road, the cyclist has the same legal meaning as a car. So it's effectively a junction. It's like, becomes like, in this case, it would be a crossroad junction, but with cycle only traffic. And we're going, oh, look, come on. It looks, it smells, it feels like a crossing. Let's just call it a crossing. And we've just got that authorised by the Department for Transport, hence the zigzags. And so cars could recognise that there's some kind of crossing activity in there. So we're tremendously excited about this. But the big thing is that the pedestrians and cyclists are separated. The go-to crossing, signal crossing used in the UK and Ireland as well is the toucan, which infers a shared use, and then see previous statements about how you'll actually stop cycling by having shared use. So there's ways of avoiding shared use, and let's continue that theme. I'll make everybody in Manchester, all the engineers, go through this kind of flow chart, which I'd love to spend the next hour going through it with you. But it's all the different options, all those kind of green options. What have you got? Are you doing a crossroad? Is it a dog leg? Is it a left-right? That's going to be like harder than a right-left, because you're on effectively the easy side of the road to come off there. So you might do different approaches. I go through and I say, well, rule all these things out. Could you have blocked one of the roads and done it straight up? How do you get it separated? And there's turns out we come up with 39 different ways of avoiding shared use if you're trying to get a cyclist across the road. So no one's been this extensive, because trust me, I'm somewhat obsessed with crossings and how important they are to the network. So it's worth looking at the interim design guide appendix in Greater Manchester and have a look. There's lots of standard details for our kind of SPARROW ones in there as well. These are kind of little schematic versions. What I'm trying to say, there's 39 different ways that we know of avoiding shared use. Don't just think, I'm getting a cyclist across the road, I better do a toucan. that's a fail. It's certainly a fail in the policy guidance that are coming out from the government in the United Kingdom at the moment. So lots of work in that area. I said to talk about this, and I'm going to talk about this, albeit it's a couple of years old this now. Well, we can't finish building it. This one actually in Bolton is only about 8 or 9 months old, so we'll still put that in the innovation camp. But really, again, in the nothing new under the sun, you could take that book from 1974 that I mentioned and see almost this exact drawing. And it's very much inspired by the Dutch design practice of separating cyclists in both time and space. So space in that they're in separated and segregated cycle routes on the approach, and time in that you're never crossing the junction at a time when another vehicle, a motor vehicle, is turning across your path. So you're kind of conflict free, going parallel with the pedestrians. Definitely best practice. We did look at Danish approaches in the UK and tried them where we're kind of relying on cars giving way. I want to come back to that in a minute with some Irish ones. But it wasn't a huge success for us in the UK. So we're definitely looking more at this kind of this Dutch style. Some Dutch people have been saying, hey, that's not the Dutch style. You should have the cycle lane on the inside. To which we in Manchester say, you're doing it wrong. You're doing it wrong. If you put the cyclists going around the outside of pedestrians in the middle, you can have diagonal pedestrian crossing, so you can cross a pedestrian on their design line. Surely that's got to be better. We also think you can get bigger storage islands for the pedestrians when they're waiting. So you'll see the islands where pedestrians are waiting are quite large, and then they're crossing to another large island, and then they're thinking about, oh, where's the cyclist going across there? But they're already in a large space. Whereas in sometimes when you put the cycle lane on the inside, you get really tiny slithery islands for pedestrians to wait on. So they tend to wait on the footway and then walk across the cycle lane. And we think there's more conflict with it. We've built 3 of these and there's another 10 going in. So we're doing some monitoring to kind of prove the case. But we kind of think for us, and within the more UK style rules, that this approach works a lot better. All right. Let's talk about some Irish innovation. I was looking at, and I was invited to come in and look at the signal junction stuff. So I'll get back to that, as that's my favorite area to talk about. But interesting stuff I saw in the Dublin Bus Connects document about signal crossings on bus stop bypasses, which is a really interesting way to take it. Like in the UK, we kind of thought this might be a little bit over engineering. And when we tested bus stop bypasses with the Transport Research Laboratory, and we shipped in visually impaired people into a forest where we built one, we're saying, what do you think? The zebra seemed to come in there, but then what I like about and why I think Ireland's been really innovative at the moment is they're really taking on board issues with visually impaired people and saying, well, they feel a lot more comfortable with a signal crossing. I see that as a design standard. I've not seen this anywhere else in the world to have a signal crossing in there. The issue comes, well, there's a few issues, but the thing that I'll be watching out for, the research question is, will cyclists respect that signal? Because one of the rules we have in signal design is if you stop someone for a red light, particularly a cyclist or a pedestrian, it should be obvious what the conflict is. Because then you go, oh, right, I see, they've stopped me because there's a whole rake of cars coming across there. In this case, when that button goes, will it be obvious enough to a cyclist what the conflict is, and will you get good compliance? So I'll be watching out to see how these bed in. And if they work, and it's 100% success, then maybe we have to go this extra mile. I've just put in a few things that we've been looking at in Greater Manchester of a detection on the approach. So one where I'll explain quickly how this one in the middle works, because this is the innovative element of it. We've got a camera up there that's looking down the cycle track as it approaches. And when a visually impaired person comes along, presses the push button, we want to give them an audible indication of the proximity and the approach speed of a cyclist. So this is associated with a zebra, but it could be in a signal. So one of their issues is they don't know whether cyclists have stopped or not. That's the thing. And if it's a zebra, you don't know whether you can stop out there because they can't see if they're approaching. And yes, they've got full legal priority with the zebra, but will the cyclist stop? And that's kind of, I think, the issue with a red light as well. It'll be like, cyclist, you must stop. But how do you know they will stop? And will it be obvious enough? So it's nowhere near as strong as the the Irish one you're looking at. But what we're looking at Manchester is just letting people know, beep, 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 beep. All right, they've stopped. Thank you. Thanking you for converting that proximity and the approach speed of a cyclist, which is all totally known technology, converting that into an audible signal for me so I kind of know I can go. That's a kind of like a technical solution that I'm hoping we're going to test in the next year or so. A kind of more straightforward one, I asked like someone who works with visually impaired groups, how do we tackle this one? And he came up with just like, have a barrier that comes down, no ambiguity. That's how you make them happy. Lo-fi, press the button, it goes down. You know they're going to stop. And I really couldn't argue with the logic. So it's really interesting to see what you're doing in Ireland. I'll be watching out for it to see how it behaves. And we'll, again, how do you do a bus stop bypass and keep everybody safe? That's the research question that I'm hoping we're going to answer. Another couple of things that are really interesting, something that I've been trying to push. And this is something used quite a lot around the world. So flashing amber turn. So basically, like when a vehicle's turning, you've got a flashing amber, and it's it isn't like a green light instruction to just go off to the left, and that's the fundamental issue with certainly UK signal design. And it's good to see that Ireland's breaking away from that finally, from some of the bad practice we do. But like, be interesting to see how Irish drivers react to this. Will they actually know if they're turning left and flashing amber, they can't just go shooting through the junction like they've done for the whole rest of their lives? So it'll be really interesting to see if the flashing amber works. And particularly like it's just for cyclists that the conflict is there as well. They're not letting pedestrians go in a lot of the Dublin Bus Connect ones at the same time. So you've got two research questions there. Will drivers yield? And will drivers yield if it's only cyclists? So interesting stuff. The flashing light yielding, I wanted to tie in the UK with pedestrians and cyclists going at the same time. And then we get like a massively efficient junctions, but it'll be interesting to see how this one beds down. So it was on my list of things to check, but everybody got a little bit bored of me testing new stuff in London, and I had to get stuff in Manchester. But I'm really excited to see this being tested in a similar environment to the one we have over here. So yeah, really, where does all this lead to? Really, in the UK, I'm saying really we need a signalized zebra. We need to be able to put zebras in at signal junctions like we have in the entire rest of the world. And what does that mean? Well, as a traffic engineer and go, well, I'm pumping 40% more capacity into a junction. And like we compare the method of control from like a protected junction. I've shown it there in 4 stages to allow the rights, but theoretically that could work in 3 stages with traffic going left, right, traffic going up and down, and then all cyclists, all peds going in that same stage. So you've got that stage, but at stage 3, a little bit of lost time creeping in there, not the most efficient. The way the rest of the world, and particularly America, have been pushing this one as well, is to let north-south traffic go at the same time as north-south cyclists and pedestrians, and anybody turning yield. So this is the way your flashing amber will come in, and then east-west, everybody goes, and anybody turning yields. So 2 stages, no lost time. It's a traffic engineer's dream, but like it's not what you're doing in Ireland. You're kind of doing like we'll let cyclists go in that one, and it'll be a test. But you still effectively got British style rules that nowhere else in the rest of the world uses. So it might be something that you might want to think about. I've got like a kind of 4-year plan for making this happen in the UK, and that's with a fair wind. But there's nothing stopping the introduction of signalized zebras and really efficient junctions that work for cars and people walking and cycling and everybody really. It's just like you'll lose that sanctity of the green man for pedestrians. But for me, the kind of fix I've been suggesting in the UK for that is to like have it where if a visually impaired person comes along, they can call up a dedicated pedestrian stage. Most of the time it runs, as I was saying, everybody going parallel turning, kind of more Danish style. But like if a visually impaired person comes along, they can call up an old school stage where it's a green man and there's no conflict. So I think that's a potential way around it. So that's where we could go. That's enough of me. I know I've gone a little bit over time, and I'll leave some time for questions, but thanks for listening. I'll stop sharing. That was the last one I had. Yeah.
Fantastic, Brian.